and to kind of be thinking about the bigger picture. I don't think it's never a bad thing to be doing, to always be thinking about what's happening and being engaged in the moment, but also be thinking about where we are in our lives and in our community, where we are in in the bigger the macro picture, where we are in this, because we are part of history. And I think that alone was a good part of what this article reminds us of, that we are a people of history, and that needs to be reminded. We need to remember that. But it also, again, we got to be in this moment. And one of the things we want to remind people: come Friday night, or come tomorrow night for Pirkei Avot. We'll be in person and online, but come Friday night or come online to hear Joe, because he's here for one day, one night only. And I think people will not only enjoy his music, but enjoy him as a person, and as somebody who I think you'll really get a feeling of what is also happening in American Judaism today, which is some stuff that your grandparents and great grandparents could have only dreamed of. And one of them is a dude from Texas who converted to Judaism and is now singing Jewish songs that are meaningful, uplifting, powerful, and just musically just beautiful. So we hope to see you Friday at 7 for that. We want to thank the Wassermans for sponsoring that in honor of Philip's mother and father of blessed memory. So some times for us to really think about being a Jewish American. And by the way, does anybody know what that actually says at the top here? Any Yiddish speakers want to translate that for us? No?
No.
No Yiddish. No Yiddish speakers want to. Well,
it was transliterated. I could probably read it.
So, was teugnet for America, teug auch near for Juden. So, what's good, what's useful for America is useful for the Jews. What's not useful for the Jews is not useful for America. And then the big line there says, Oi, was ist geworden von einem goldenen Land, which is exactly what our ancestors would say today in the last couple of months. Oi, oi, you know what that means. Was ist geworden, what has become of our golden land, of our golden lands. So definitely some questioning and definitely some reapprisement of what's going to happen. I don't know. Say it in Yiddish, say it in English. It is some challenging times for us, mentally, if not physically and emotionally. There's some stuff we're really agonizing over. And again, as we enter now, so my 151 days of captivity. Yeah, it's been a time that I couldn't have imagined as we began this year, as we got together for high holidays. So let's move into to the history. Let's move into to Amos. But by the way, there's a little segue here. The guy who wrote this article, Franklin Foer, is a member of a very distinguished family. Franklin, there's Franklin right there. His grandparents were Holocaust survivors. His father and mother are very active in the Jewish community. But look who his brother is. One of his brothers is Jonathan Safran Foer, who wrote the books Everything is Illuminated, which was turned into a movie. A couple other books that he wrote too that did fairly well. And then his brother Josh, another amazing guy. He is studied at Yale, pretty smart dude. But look what he did. In 2013, right? So how old is he? He was born in 82. In 2013, the kid helped co-found what we're about to jump on right now, Sepharia. So Franklin's brother created Sepharia, which is where we're off to now. So it's a pretty distinguished family, a pretty much doing stuff that helps the whole Jewish community. So let's settle back into where we left off. And we want to thank Judith that was reading for us last week. Rosemary is here with us this week. She settled up in the Northern California area, and we're glad that she's able to be with us. And well, Judith, what do you think the theme was last week? As you read through it, what do you think the themes were last week that we read it in the first part? We're going to finish Amos today. We read the first 5 chapters. What do you think
I don't remember what I had for dinner from last week.
So you began reading, Amos begins with a diatribe against all the countries around Israel.
Oh, right.
Then he circles around, he comes in and he hits Israel. And again, he is...
The theme is, just because I like you doesn't mean you're going to be spared.
Yes. And you have definitely overstayed your welcome, Northern Kingdom. That is where we are at. We're going to continue with that. We pointed out, Judith, actually, we got to read last week some of the, we also read, which again, I didn't talk about a lot, but I talked about it enough for most people, maybe too much for most people, is we have these great references to some of the things that we were engaging in as Jews, which were worshiping the stars. We were worshiping Sukkot and Kiyun, which are probably Saturn and Jupiter, or Saturn and another heavenly body. We also read that they were worshiping, or not worshiping, but we have references to Orion and Pleiades. There's definitely references to the stars in this book, but we also read some very powerful lines: hate evil and love good, establish justice at the gate, and this idea of mishpat and tzedek, that those ideas of mishpat and tzedek are referenced here in line 24. Let justice well up like water, righteousness like a strong stream, an unfailing stream, a raging stream. That's one of the most famous lines in the whole prophet Amos. So that's kind of where we left off. This line, continues. Again, that might have been the end of a prophecy with said God, whose name is God of hosts. So we're going to pick up here. He's going to continue reprimanding the Northern Kingdom in particular. We read about the beautiful ivory castles that they lived in. And we've actually, as I mentioned, we found archaeological evidence in the area around Samaria, which is in the northern part of the West Bank. Some Jews call it Samaria, some people call it the northern part of the West Bank. But we found those ivory, beautiful ivory carvings, and they were a very wealthy. The Northern Kingdom was successful and was wealthy, and it's sometimes stronger than the Southern Kingdom. And at some points, it looks like they looked down on the Southern Kingdom because they actually had more wealth and more success than their southern neighbors. Maybe because, again, their land was more fertile and not as rocky. The area of Judea and the southern part is more deserty and a little bit more rocky. And the northern part, which is today the Galilee and the northern part of Israel, where so many kibbutzim and so many farms are, there's a reason for it. It's good weather. There's good topography and good soil. The geology is better, and so maybe that's why. So we're going to pick up that theme and let's read, if you will. Rosemary, start us in chapter 6.
Oh, you who are at ease in Zion and confident on the hill of Samaria, you notables of the leading nation on whom the house of Israel pin their hopes, cross over to Chana and see Go from there to Great Hamat and go down to Gath of the Philistines. Are you better than those kingdoms? Or is their territory larger than yours?
So again, bringing in what we read about in the first chapter, the Syrians, the nation of Aram, the Philistines, uh, comparing them to Israel.
Yet you ward off the thought of a day of woe and convene a session of lawlessness. They lie on ivory beds, lolling on their couches, feasting on lambs from the flock and on calves from the stalls.
Yeah. By the way, people are lighting me up right now, completely independently about this article that I just shared with everybody this morning. So, Elise, you were one of the first, just so you remember. You were one of the first, but yes, people are flipping out. So please read it after we're done. But look again, look at this line. They lie on ivory beds. This we know for a fact. And what better description of, people who are full of themselves and living these luxurious and opulent lives. And here they are. Well, look how he makes fun of them.
They hum snatches of song to the tune of the lute. They account themselves musicians like David. They drink straight from the wine bowls and anoint themselves with the choicest oils, but they are not concerned about the ruin of Joseph.
Yeah. And so he's invoking our patriarchs and our kings. And here this is very rare, actually, that we have references like this, which is, let's just see. Again, it's how they're going to translate this, but basically they're great musicians like David, so that's like saying, they see themselves like the Beatles. But here, of course, it's reminding us that King David was not just a king but a musician. And so this is rare. I mean, we think about it all the time because David being a musician is such a part of our midrash, and it's so legendary, and it's been thousands of years. But early on, it shows you that even in the Bible itself, we have references to David in this way. What's important about this, and again, some people will say it's, legendary or whatever. There are what we call the minimalists there in the biblical scholarship crew who don't believe that David and Solomon really ever existed, that they're mythic people, that there's no historical evidence for them. But here, if we have a pretty accurate, and we have no reason to believe that Hosea is not writing clearly around 750. He's writing. I mean, I guess anything is possible, but he is clearly writing with the knowledge that the Northern Kingdom is still existing, right? So it's 750, around 750. The destruction in 722 hasn't happened yet. And it means that in 750, there are already references to David like this that are 200 years after he lived, and not 2,000 years after he lived or 3,000 years after he lived, where you would say, well, we don't really know. The fact that it's said like this in this way kind of affirms that like everybody knew about David being a musician, even at this time. So again, it doesn't happen a lot, and when it happens, you kind of have to point it out. All right.
Assuredly, right soon they shall head the column of exiles. They shall loll no more at festive meals. The sovereign God wholeheartedly swears, I loathe the pride of Jacob, and I detest his fortresses. I will declare forfeit city and inhabitants alike, declares the Eternal, the God of hosts. If 10 people are left in one house, they shall die. And if someone's kinsman, who is to burn incense for one of the deceased, comes to carry the remains out of the house, and he calls to the one at the rear of the house, are there any alive besides you? The answer will be no, and he will say, hush, so that no one may utter God's name.
Yeah, this seems to be something, and again, there's a few notes here. When we have this kind of phrase, meaning of Hebrew uncertain, it means that we don't exactly know what he's talking about. We're kind of guessing what these references are. But it's something to, as you can see from the context, something to the effect that everyone's dead. That everyone's dead. And he's definitely saying it in a way that's powerful, that it's idiomatic, that you can think about how we use idiom today, what kind of phrases, that we would use today. And some of them are not like, they're really, if you think about them, kind of not very nice, not very respectful to the dead. But there is this kind of, there is something happening here with the language where he's using phrases that basically convey that everybody's dead.
For God will command, and the great house shall be smashed to bits, and the little house to splinters. Can horses gallop on a rock? Can it be plowed with oxen? Yet you have turned justice into poison weed, and the fruit of righteousness to wormwood.
And here again is that juxtaposition of justice and righteousness, mishpat and staka, or mishpat and tzedek, law and righteousness. So again, these are essentially kind of the theme that Amos uses throughout is he's looking at how people are administering justice and law and order. I mean, we use the phrase today, law and order. There, he used the phrase mishpat utzeg, or utstaka. That's the phrase he used. We could say law, but we don't. We say law and order. I'm not just saying it's a phrase. I mean, there's actually, for poetic purposes, it works well. But it would be like if we said, you've turned your law into, toilet paper, your justice into trash. That's the kind of your order into, that's the kind of phrase that he's using, right? So
those who are so happy about Lo Dabar, who exult, by our might we have captured Karnaim. But I, O house of Israel, will raise up a nation against you, declares the Eternal, the God of hosts, who will harass you from Lebo Hamat to the Wadi Arabah.
Yeah, now that chapter just ended. It kind of ended. And that's because the next line here goes into kind of a whole different kind of text. Perhaps, again, a whole different prophecy. But what he finishes here is when he talks about Karnaim and Lo Dabar, he's talking about victories that the Northern Kingdom has had. And he's saying, you're celebrating victories that you've had. You have no idea what's going to happen to you. And these attacks that you're going to have are going to come from another nation. They're going to come from it's going to come from the Arava, which is the south, but also from the north, from Lebo Hamat, across the Jordan River. You're going to be attacked from your east, that you're going to have these attacks. And so that's, again, a very short chapter. It's only 14 verses. The 7th chapter again begins with this.
This is what my sovereign God showed me. A plague of locusts was created at the time when the late sown crops were beginning to sprout, the late sown crops after the king's reaping. When it had finished devouring the herbage in the land, I said, "Oh, my sovereign eternal one, pray forgive. How will Jacob survive? He is so small."
Yeah, and so this is what we read about in Joel. Locusts. And so here, again, we have locusts that are attacking. And here, again, the note says, not really sure what it is, but after the rainy season, this harvest that happened, the locust destroyed, and it's now done. There's nothing more that they can harvest. So this is like the absolute worst time for the locust to come. There's no other harvest coming that they can still bring in. The harvest is brought in, and it's just everything's gone. The locusts, there's no other harvest that's about to come. There's nothing to happen after. So the absolute worst time.
God relented concerning this. It shall not come to pass, said God. This is what my sovereign God showed me. Lo, my sovereign God was summoning to contend by fire that consumed the great deep and was consuming the fields.
Yeah. So again, it says that God isn't going to do this, right? God shows it to him and then says this isn't going to happen. Well, seems like maybe that's only for a certain time, because then there is a just this note. Yeah, it's essentially the same thing. Great fire. A great fire that also consumes the fields.
I said, oh, my sovereign, eternal one, refrain. How will Jacob survive? He is so small. God relented concerning this. That shall not come to pass either, said my sovereign God. This is what I was shown. God was standing on a wall checked with a plumb line while holding a plumb line. And God asked me, what do you see, Amos? A plumb line, I replied. And my sovereign declared, I am going to apply a plumb line to my people Israel. I will pardon them no more.
So what is this about? Well, that doesn't help you because it just says it could be a pickaxe. But this is a famous, let me just see if it just says here, same thing again. So this this vision that Amos has of God doing a plumb line measurement on us, or doing a plumb line measurement, and says this is on Israel. Well, it tells us a little bit about the fact that they had in the ancient Israel, they had plumb line. I mean, that's what we believe it is. It's the normal translation. I don't know, does anyone have a different, I mean, does anyone have that pickaxe translation? I think that's a newer translation. Anybody out there, Mary or anybody else? I'm pretty sure the King James says plumb line, but
It says plumb line.
so look, this is I don't know, this is maybe one of the more famous images of from Amos. Look, first of all, it's kind of it's kind of disconcerting that God, he's seeing God with the plumb line, just to kind of give you I mean, these are like drawings of like what a plumb line looks like. You can see a little bit, like, obviously you have people that just refer to the plumb line, which is what again, you don't hear it that much in Jewish commentary. The Jewish commentary doesn't seem to be as I don't know if there's a reason for it, but we tend not to maybe talk about it as much. I don't know, maybe because we weren't in building as much as other people. I don't know, but it definitely God holding a plumb line, which was used for construction, was, I think, for some people very dramatic. But it tends to be used more, as you can see, almost every one of these references. I think every one of these references is a Christian commentary. And so this kind of idea that God is measuring the people and is essentially now saying, I'm not covering them anymore. I'm not allowing them. The measurement is here now. This is the time now when we're getting down to this. And so the plumb line is connected to judgment. It's connected to the prophecies, and the prophecy specifically of destruction finally coming to bear. Because remember, God has, every time God says, I'm going to send fire, I'm going to send I'm going to send this destruction in locusts, he doesn't. And now God is saying, no, this is it. And so the plumb line represents it's over now. This is it. So yeah, there's people who just refer to the plumb line. And for people who are familiar with biblical prophecy, they know what they're talking about. It's interesting that plumb lines are usually used for construction. In this case, it's really being used for destruction rather than construction. This is really for destruction. I guess you could use plumb lines for destruction too, but
You're saying this wall is so crooked, it can't be fixed, and I'm going to have to knock it down.
yeah. And that's kind of, I don't want to say for sure, but I think the reason that it's used more in Christian prophecy is because there is a little bit more apocalyptic text, right? And I think there's a little bit more emphasis on apocalypse. So I think this represents that kind of judgment or final judgment. But it's a graphic image. It's one that sticks out in people's minds, and it's definitely one that, if people are familiar with Amos, this is one of the things that they remember is this plumb line prophecy. So let's read what it means.
The shrines of Isaac shall be laid waste, and the sanctuaries of Israel reduced to ruins, and I will turn upon the house of Jeroboam with the sword.
Yeah, so this is pretty clear that this is destruction, right? This is going to be destruction through violence, through sword, through killing and war, right? And the sanctuaries of Israel are going to be destroyed. And then it also says the shrines of Isaac, the Bamot. Now this is a little confusing. Does anybody have a different translation? Mary, do you have a different translation of verse 9? Mary?
It's slightly different wording, but essentially the same.
Says the shrines of Isaac shall be laid to waste.
The high places of Isaac.
Yeah. Okay. So this whole understanding though of what's happening is well, obviously the temples that the people have in the north, like the golden calves and all those shrines, but we never really heard of the shrines of Isaac. That means there were places that were also attached to our ancestor Isaac that were also being worshipped at. So it means that there were a lot of sanctuaries, shrines, and places where people worshipped. Maybe, again, they weren't supposed to, but they worshipped at places where our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, were at. So there were definitely shrines that the kings built, but some of these shrines go back to our beginning of our history. So that's what Amos had done. Now what happens?
Amaziah, the priest of Bethel, sent this message to King Jeroboam of Israel. Amos is conspiring against you within the house of Israel. The country cannot endure the things he is saying. For Amos has said, Jeroboam shall die by the sword, and Israel shall be exiled from its soil. Amaziah also said to Amos, Seer, up with you to the land of Judah. Earn your living there, and do your prophesying there.
So you can see that we have a little narrative here. This little section here actually tells us that Amos got in trouble. He got the authorities after him. And so, needless to say, they don't like what he's saying about the shrines being evil, they are going to be destroyed, that Jeroboam is going to die. And again, when Amaziah says that to him, that's not the majority of what Amos is saying, but clearly what's going to get Jeroboam upset is that there's a prophet going around telling people that the king's going to die. So Amaziah knows what to say. He knows that the best way of getting Amos in trouble is to make his prophecies, or to make his crime one of speaking out against the king, rather than him and what he's doing, which is getting people supporting the northern shrines. So he says, get down to Judah, get out of here, get out.
But don't ever prophesy again at Bethel, for it is a king's sanctuary and a royal palace. Amos answered Amaziah, I am not a prophet, and I am not a prophet's disciple. I am a cattle breeder and a tender of sycamore figs. Yeah.
So we read about this at the beginning, that he's a cattle breeder. Here it also says that he also has some type of cultivation of figs that he also takes care of. So not only is he a breeder, cattle breeder, boker is a cowboy. I'm not a prophet, I'm a cowboy. And I'm a farmer. So, what's awesome about it is he says, look, I'm not a professional prophet. And so, he's basically saying, and he says, I'm not a prophet. I'm not a Ben Navi. I'm not a disciple of a prophet, right? Or a son of a prophet. This is not my job. I'm just a guy. I'm just a guy that lives and lives here, and I'm a working man. So it's a powerful response to the authorities, because he's saying, look, you can't stop. I'm not here to prophesize. I'm here to speak the truth. I'm not here to this is not my job. I'm not going south to this is where I own land. This is where I keep this is where I live. You can't kick me out of my house. You can't kick me off my farm, off my ranch. This is a little bit of a Yellowstone moment here.
But God took me away from following the flock, and God said to me, go, prophesy to my people Israel. And so hear the word of God. You say, I must not prophesy about the house of Israel or preach about the house of Isaac, but this, I swear, is what God said. Your wife shall play the whore in the town, your sons and daughters shall fall by the sword, and your land shall be divided up with a measuring line, and you yourself shall die on impure soil, for Israel shall be exiled from its soil.
Yeah, so he doesn't back down. He doesn't back down, and he doesn't, he's not afraid to tell them this is what's going to happen. So these are the words of God. I didn't ask to do this. This isn't what this is not what I would train to do. I didn't have some skill, I wasn't raised in this kind of community of prophesizing. It seems like there were schools of prophecy and families of prophecy, if you will. Nope. This guy says it's over. And he doesn't back down. Yeah.
What do you think the last part of that para, for Israel shall be exiled from its soil? How do you read into that?
No, he's telling them that the exile which is around the corner, is going to happen. And, the fact is that, one of the reasons why we keep this guy, why we read him thousands of years later, was because he was right. We kept these guys because what they said happened. And it's not just that it happened. I mean, obviously, if the guy just prophesized and said, hey, I think Israel's going to be destroyed and exiled, okay, but obviously it's the message that surrounds that. So the fact that it came true, but also the fact that the way he says it is so powerful, and what he, why we kept it after the North was destroyed was so that the South would learn from it and not have the same thing happen. And so, look, he wrote this 150 years before the kingdom of Judah was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar that we read about, and so this was an early text that was there to remind us what was going to happen or what could happen. So it's very powerful. I mean, look, he doesn't pull any punches, He says your wife will be a whore, Your kids will be murdered. So this guy was saying this to a king who was still in power at the time. And he did it without fear. I mean, I don't know if he did it without fear, but he did it. Might have been scared, but he did it. And he didn't back down.
My question is the last few words. For Israel shall be exiled from its soil.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't,
So, I mean, it's literally saying the words are, they will go into exile. They will leave. They will be forced off of its land. Israel will
so
be,
all its inhabitants, okay.
yeah. So the northern kingdom will, be exiled. And we're not sure if, it doesn't seem like every Israelite was taken away, but at least the leadership was. And this is pretty tough. Yeah. This is pretty tough. Yeah, it's pretty tough. Judith had made the point that it was nice that Isaac gets mentioned. Yeah, he gets mentioned, but it's not good. I mean, well, it's good as anything. Isaac is mentioned here too. So yeah, he is. Yeah, I mean, technically, the house of Isaac technically would also include the Edomites, right? Or not? It wouldn't. Yeah, it would. I mean, it would. I guess technically he could say that it's also. I mean, that also includes Edom, but I don't know. I mean, he doesn't prophesize that much about Edom. We read a little bit, but it definitely wasn't just. It wasn't like Edom was not really singled out of any of the nations. I think he's going to be mentioned again coming up, but I don't know. I mean, definitely it seems like Isaac as he relates to us rather than as he would have related to the Edomites. But I mean, they are going to be mentioned again. I think it's coming up in this chapter, then the next chapter. It mentions Edom one more time. All right, this is a different prophecy a little bit, right? And we know that this dude Amos is a tender of trees, that he takes care of trees. He's a gardener slash, well, he has some type of arboreal mastery. It seems like he's not just picking fruit for himself. Or maybe he helped take care of trees. I mean, you didn't say that at the beginning of the introduction, but a little bit about figs, a little prophecy that uses figs. Here's what it says.
This is what my sovereign God showed me. There was a basket of figs. I was asked, what do you see, Amos? A basket of figs, I replied. And God said to me, the hour of doom has come for my people Israel. I will not pardon them again.
So this makes absolutely no sense, right?
No. What is that about?
What is
Figs
this?
are a portent of doom.
Yes. So why is it?
No,
so,
it's kind of like Indiana Jones, bad dates.
bad dates. Bad dates. There was a basket of figs, right? Which again, we assume it's figs. I don't know. Does King James say figs or does it say a summer fruit? What does it say, Mary?
It says summer fruit.
So kites is the word for summer. It's all coming down to this, by the way. So literally it says summer fruit. And that's what the word for summer is in Hebrew is kites, right? So I was asked, what do you see, Amos? He says, love kites. I see it. I see a basket of figs, right? So God
It
said,
felt like it may be a pun of some kind in Hebrew.
exactly, here it is. Aleba ha-kates. Here comes the kates. So in Hebrew, it says kates, right? So you have to know from the notes what it's trying to tell us. But here it says kites. And here you see, I mean, I'm just going to show you the word in the words used here again, kites, which again technically means summer. But let's say they're dates or figs or some fruit that's harvested. I think maybe dates aren't harvested in the summer, which is why it doesn't say that. But I don't know. I'm not a
You
fruit.
could make a pun in English with dates, you know, a bad
Correct.
date is coming.
Exactly. The date is coming, right? The date has come. But that is the word kates in Hebrew. So here's kites and here's kates. You can see that it's a kuf and a tzadi, which is a kuf yud tzadi. And the yud is oftentimes not even there. It's just vocalized as a kates. So the word is the same thing. I've shown you figs. I've shown you the fruit. This is the kates. This is the kates. This is the doom. So yes, bad dates. It's bad. It's bad times. It's doom. So the figs represents because it's a pun. It's a play on words. If you don't understand Hebrew, that is the silliest. Without a note or without an explanation, and I would say this explanation isn't fantastic because if you don't look at the footnotes, you're not going to notice it. And even then, I don't know if you'll notice that kites and kates are the same, but they're the same letters. I mean, there it doesn't even look like it because there you've got 5 letters and only 2 of them are the same here. But in Hebrew, and even if you don't read Hebrew, you can see that the word kites and kates are the same. So same letters. So it's a Hebrew, it's a play on words, and that we have a lot. And when it's so necessary to explain it like that, you really should make it clear. But anyways, that's what it is. You have to know a little bit of Hebrew or have somebody explain you the Hebrew, but that's a complete Hebrew pun, which they understood and you understand it in the language, but you don't understand it if you don't have the translation and explanation. So here is the vision of what is happening here.
And the singing women of the palace shall howl on that day, declares the sovereign God. So many corpses left lying everywhere. Hush.
And by the way, that's another play on the imagery, right? That the women, there's women that were singing, that were paid to be singers in the palace. They now are howling. They are wailing on that day. So many corpses. And the same word in Hebrew and in English, which is hus. It's an onomatopoeia, right? It's hus. It's hush. Shh. We say shh. It's the sounds that we make when we want somebody to stop talking or to just listen, you know. So that's the play on the singing. The singers have now turned to howling and then say hush.
Listen to this, you who devour the needy, annihilating the poor of the land, saying, if only the new moon were over so that we could sell grain, the Sabbath so that we could offer wheat for sale, using an ephah that is too small and a shekel that is too big, tilting a dishonest scale and selling grain refuse as grain. We will buy the poor for silver, the needy for a pair of sandals.
So you can see what's going on here, right? The lack of ethics in the marketplace. That's a huge problem, and it's done by debasing and using fraudulent weights and measures, which is obviously in the Torah is a sin. It's actually a sin. And then if you look at it too, it's exploitation of the poor. And there's also this dig that he makes on the people who don't want to They don't want to rest on Shabbat, right? They don't want to rest on Rosh Chodesh, which tells us they were also at this time still following the Torah practice of celebrating Rosh Chodesh as a holiday. Instead of doing what you're supposed to be doing on holidays, you wanted to get into business. You wanted to do your business on those days. You were not looking forward to them, and you were not celebrating them. You were literally looking forward to them being over. I'm looking at my watch. I'm waiting for Shabbos to be over so I can start doing business. So all of those are digs on the way they were conducting business.
God swears, by the pride of Jacob, I will never forget any of their doings. Shall not the earth shake for this, and all that dwell on it mourn? Shall it not all rise like the Nile, and surge and subside like the Nile of Egypt?
Yeah. Now, yeah, I mean, that's the translation. The Yaor, and then it says Yaor Mitzrayim, the Nile of Egypt. Again, interestingly, by the way, the word in Hebrew for Yaor, for the Nile, is actually the word for Yaor. Could also be could also be a river. So in ancient Hebrew, the word for river could also have been the cognate for the Nile because it was the biggest river. But we do think that the word Ya'ar in Hebrew, which could also be a river, the cognate for river was used as a word for any river originally, and then the river. But for example, like in ancient Israel, the oldest rivers in Israel are the Yarden, right? And which some people think, comes from the word Yarad, to go down, but it could be, again, the word Yar means river. The other river that comes out near Tel Aviv is called the Yarmuk River. So it could be shall not rise like a river, surge and supply, like the river of Egypt. But regardless, this was something that people knew about it in the ancient world, especially in Israel, that the rivers go up and down, and they sometimes flood, and nothing floods like the Nile. And the whole economy in Egypt is based on the Nile flooding and on the cycles of that river and how it floods. But it is a major event. So,
And in that day, declares the sovereign God, I will make the sun set at noon. I will darken the earth on a sunny day. I will turn your festivals into mourning and all your songs into dirges. I will put sackcloth on all loins and tonsures on every head. I will make the earth mourn as for an only child, all of it as on a bitter day.
yeah. So these are all indications of what people did when they were mourning. These are things that, some of them we still do. Some of them we don't. But those festivals you try to get out of, those are going to turn into a Shiva, right? That's going to turn into mourning, right? Your songs will be dirges. So your celebration songs will turn into wailing of, sad songs. And again, all these other things, sackcloth and tonsures, which we don't do that anymore. But it shows you that maybe people used to do that, which is like cut off part of their hair. But it's definitely bad. It's the stuff that you do when you're really, really in a tragic situation and mourning.
A time is coming, declares the sovereign God, when I will send a famine upon the land, not a hunger for bread or a thirst for water, but for hearing the words of God. People shall wander from sea to sea and from north to east to seek the word of God, but they shall not find it.
Now that's a pretty powerful image, right? It says that they're not going to hunger. This famine isn't going to be for food, but for hearing God's word. And this is another line that kind of stands out in when people study Amos, they study this line and they reflect on this line, that when people are not hearing God's word, that'll be a famine. That'll be something powerful, which is not just that they won't, I mean, it's going to be bad, food and all those other things, but you're not going to hear God. I'm not going to be speaking to you. And you're going to feel that. You're going to notice that. You're going to look for it. You're going to wander and look for it. But you're not going to find it.
In that day, the beautiful maidens and the young men shall faint with thirst. Those who swear by the guilt of Samaria, saying, as your God lives, Dan, and as the way to Beersheba lives, they shall fall to rise no more.
And that's weird because we know that in the north, the far north, there is a shrine, right? We know that there's that shrine that was built at Dan and Bethel, one calf in Dan and one calf in Bethel. But why this? And specifically, why the way to Beersheba? So it could be, again, that there were shrines in the south that even though there was Jerusalem, there were other shrines in the south that people still worshiped at. And to some extent, for people who understood that there wasn't just Jerusalem, that there were shrines all over the place that people could worship at. That this was all part of the problem. Again, for people who believe that the only place that Jews should be offering sacrifices was Jerusalem, all of these shrines, the shrines of Isaac, the shrines of Jacob, the shrines of Abraham, the shrines that were, again, maybe Beersheba goes back to Abraham, who had a pact at Beersheba. That these places where there was connections to Jewish history, that the people who didn't want people to worship in those places, the people of Jerusalem, the priests of Jerusalem, they didn't like it, right? And so when they condemn it, they're condemning all of it. They're condemning wherever it is. And again, some of it was in Judah's own backyard, including Beersheba. So Beersheba is definitely in the south. And it would have been a shrine that people were not supposed to be using, but maybe they're still using it. Yeah. So that is the end of chapter 8. This is the final chapter. So we're going to probably be ending a little bit early. Last week, if we had read chapter 5 this week, we may not have finished. And I'm not saying we rushed through it last week, but we could have broken it halfway through chapter 5. But again, this is the last part of Amos. This last part.
I observed my sovereign standing by the altar and saying, strike the capitals so that the thresholds quake, and make an end of the first of them all. And I will slay the last of them with the sword. Not one of them shall escape, and not one of them shall survive. If they burrow down to Sheol, from there my hand shall take them. And if they ascend to heaven, from there I will bring them down.
So this is pretty wild, right? See this note right here. Yeah, it just says that's this tells you that there is nowhere to run, there's nowhere to hide. You can go all the way down to the deepest parts of Sheol, which is kind of the Hebrew word, as we've talked before, of the netherworld, of the underworld. It's definitely down below, it's in the ground. It is, seems like it's it's accessible, or at least God can go there. God can also go all the way up to the Shemayim, to the heavens. Doesn't matter where you go, God will find you. You can't go anywhere to escape this. So from the deepest parts of hell to the highest parts of heaven, it's essentially what he's saying. It's difficult to read into that, by the way, anything more of what happens in those places, but it is, I mean, is it probably, again, more of a dramatic, poetic statement? You can't hide anywhere. There is no hiding from this punishment.
If they hide on the top of Carmel, there I will search them out and seize them. And if they conceal themselves from my sight at the bottom of the sea, there I will command the serpent to bite them.
Which tells us that there's a serpent in the sea that can go get you too. Some kind of dragon, some kind of sea serpent that can go down and get you.
And if they go into captivity before their enemies, there I will command the sword to slay them. I will fix my eye on them for evil and not for good. It is the sovereign Lord of hosts, at whose touch the earth trembles, and all who dwell on it mourn, and all of it swells like the Nile and subsides like the Nile of Egypt.
Yeah. Anybody have a different translation of that? Of that verse and chapter in verse 5? Anybody? So, yeah, we had that phrase before, right? It swells like the Nile, it subsides like the Nile of Egypt. It's God who does those things. It's God who makes those things happen. So
King James doesn't translate Nile, it says flood.
yeah, that's a better, good for the King James, because it's not, it's I don't like the Nile, but I'm not even sure like how you do that, but yeah, it should be river. But anyways, it's the same phrase as we had before, with now the very clear direction that God makes this stuff happen, right? And here's what he's called.
Who built the chambers in heaven and founded the vault on the earth? Who summons the waters of the sea and pours them over the land? Whose name is God.
Yeah. So this is God who made all of these things, the heaven, the earth, and the sea. Again, we have these same kind of language structures and, you know, clarity in this in the book of Job, right, where it talks about, you know, when Job is confronted by God saying, were you here when I made all these things? You don't know my plan, right? You don't understand, you don't see that. So that's definitely there. But this is a really great way of looking at how the world, or the universe to some extent, was organized by, or the way we have these levels and biomes, if you will, the way we saw it in the ancient world, the way our ancestors saw it, is there were three of them: the heavens, the earth, and the sea, the skies, the land, and the sea. What was important to know is that, like, when we get to, and we've seen in the Torah discussions about kashrut, for example, that's the way that the Bible deals with animals, not by taxonomy and you know, species. Nothing about that. There's not. It's about where the animal lives. So kosher animals that are on the land have to have, you know, split hooves and chew their cud. The animals that live in the sea, they have to have fins and they have to have scales. And then the ones that are in the heaven, in the skies, that includes things like birds, but also bats. So, you know, sea animals could be both what we would call today, by our taxonomy, we call them fish, and we have mammals that live there too, and also, you know, gastropods and all the great kinds of things that we have in the oceans. but kashrut really sees them along these lines, right? Where do they live? And so whenever we talk about, and when the Bible refers to different areas that God operates, these are the way that it's split up. Now, the hard thing for us to kind of, and I explain this to especially Christians all the time, oftentimes when it talks about heavens, we're not sure if they're talking about like the sky, right? Or everything up in heaven, including where God's abode is, which it's sometimes said is in the Shemaim, in the heavens. So they're definitely, there seems to be some kind of, sometimes the references are to heaven, but also it's the skies. And so, here the chambers in heaven sound like that's heaven, right? But it really, the words that are used there are the structure of heaven, and or the skies, really. And today we would maybe understand it as the different spheres above us, where again, where our atmosphere and ionosphere, and going through the different levels of the heavens, we actually now know that the sky is not as unidimensional as we imagined it at one point, where there was just air, and then we understand that there's different levels where we learned a lot about it as we've escaped the earth and gravity and left our planet, that yeah, it's there. The chambers of heaven are actually pretty they're astonishing, and they help protect us. They help keep our air in place. They help keep our planet at the right temperatures, and they also protect our planet from incoming projectiles. If it wasn't for those heavens, we wouldn't be able to live on Earth, because we would have been bombarded by asteroids, and we would have had no life. So it is interesting that the heavens are actually structured. There's a structure to them. And this goes all the way back to obviously the story of creation, the way creation is described in chapter 1, with the separation of the heavens, of the waters, really, from heaven and water, and then the land is created out of that. So you have the heaven, and then you have earth in the middle, and then you have the sea. But the way that they were created is heaven and sea were created, and then earth was created in the midst of that. But those three areas in the Bible you have to understand, when they're referenced, that's what's happening there. And so this is a perfect illustration of it. And what, of course, was the most important element for us in the ancient world? It's all God. So that the only people in the world at that time who understood that God was the God of all of these things, that Adonai was all of it, the totality of our experiences, that was God. Everyone else had different gods for these things. Everyone else had a different name for each of these, the gods of each of these things. But we had one God, whose name is God. And that in 730 or 740 BCE was unheard of. So we take it for granted today, but it wasn't. Then it was a radical, ridiculous concept that there was one God who made everything, who was in charge of everything. So this next line, let's take this one right here.
To me, O Israelites, you are just like the Cushites, declares God. True, I brought Israel up from the land of Egypt, but also the Philistines from Kaftor and the Arameans from Kir.
Yeah, and we read this actually as a haftarah. And what's so beautiful about this haftarah, and about reading this right now at this moment, is that God just told us, the Israelites, you are just like the Cushites. And if you look at the note here, this is the region south of Egypt. This is the same as saying to people today, you are like people from Africa. Oh, Israel, you are like the Africans. And I would say pretty much here, what's significant, these are really in the minds of in the biblical geography, these are sub-Saharan Africans. The word Cushite, Cush, is still used in Israel to describe a Black African. So here is a really powerful line, which has been used and recontextualized by people throughout history, which is that Israel is like Cush. Israel is just like any other nation that has its own identity, that has its own unique history. And God just said to the Israelites, you're like everybody else, which kind of goes against that idea of chosenness. Now, people say, but God, you brought us to the land of Israel. We have a special relationship. Remember that whole thing in Exodus where you took us up out of Egypt and you brought us to the land of Israel? And God here shoots back that answer, which is, I move people all the time. I took the Philistines from Crete, from the Aegean. I brought them to the coast. And I took the Arameans. They came from further east, and now they live in Aram, in Syria. I move people around all the time. Your story's not that different. Now, remember, this was written by Israelites who are saying, okay, well, people do get moved. And they see themselves as essentially being moved by God. Their gods move them. They have their own exile story. They have their own journey story. So this is a Jewish prophet telling the people, saying that God says it too. The other people have these stories. So this is a really interesting and humbling text. It's one that tells us, don't think you're so special, Israel. Don't think you're going to get away with anything because I have this special relationship with you. Other people have stories like yours, including people from Africa. So I love that text. It's one that, again, whenever we read it, I'm like, yeah, that's God telling us, don't think that we're going to get away with something because we're special. But here you go.
Behold, my sovereign God is keeping an eye on the sinful kingdom. I will wipe it off the face of the earth, but I will not wholly wipe out the house of Jacob, declares God.
Well, that's good. That's good. We're not all going to be destroyed. This is not necessarily going to make people feel great in the sense that we're going to be destroyed, but we're also not going to be completely destroyed. So understand that we have a special responsibility. We have a special legacy, and we could wind up being punished, but it's not going to be complete. It's not like utter destruction, because
For I will give the order and shake the house of Israel through all the nations as one shakes sand in a sieve, and not a pebble falls to the ground. All the sinners of my people shall perish by the sword, who boast, never shall the evil overtake us or come near us.
yeah, those are the people who definitely don't have any humility, right? They're going to be punished.
In that day, I will set up again the fallen booth of David. I will mend its breaches and set up its ruins anew. I will build it firm as in the days of old, so that they shall possess the rest of Edom and all the nations once attached to my name, declares God, who will bring this to pass.
Yeah, there's our little mention of Edom. But here it's in the context of you'll get Edom back. But this phrase here is also one that sometimes quoted by Christian writers. I will set up the Sukkot David. I will set up David's sukkah. it's fallen down, but I will set it back up. And I will again put its walls back up. I'll restructure and kind of like renovate, right? I'll renovate its walls, its buildings. So it will be rebuilt. And again, this is a prophecy that some Christians saw in themselves, right? That they are the fallen booth of David, Sukkot David. But also again in modern Israel, that people have felt that Israel has once again reestablished itself and has become firm as in days of old, right? The rebuilding. And again, the parts of Edom that had fallen away. And again, it seems to be the recollection of territories that Israel and Judah had lost in these last several hundred years. Those territories that were vassals to David and Solomon that had now become, and some of them had continued as vassals to the northern and southern kingdoms, but some of them had been able to get their independence as the countries, as the power of Israel and Judah waxed and waned. Sometimes again, those were opportunities for those countries like Moab and Ammon and Edom. They got their independence back. From their standpoint, that was a good thing. From our standpoint, they're supposed to be our vassals. So that's what is happening by Yom Hahu, on that day. That's the poetic and prophetic phrase. It will happen on that day.
A time is coming, declares God, when the plower shall meet the reaper, and the treader of grapes, the one who holds the bag of seed, when the mountains shall drip wine, and all the hills shall wave with grain. I will restore my people Israel. They shall rebuild ruined cities and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and drink their wine. They shall till gardens and eat their fruits. And I will plant them upon their soil, never
I don't
more
know if we
to be
should
uprooted
eat before we go to this thing tonight.
from the soil that I have given them, said the Eternal.
7 to 9, but I don't know.
Hold it 1 second. Sorry.
Layla Napoli's Pizza.
Sorry. I have to. Let me apologize, because that was definitely at a critical point in the text. The last line. I just want to get that one more time, Rosemary.
Okay. I will restore my people Israel. They shall rebuild ruined cities and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and drink their wine. They shall till gardens and eat their fruits. And I will plant them upon their soil, never more to be uprooted from the soil that I've given them, said the Eternal, your God.
Yeah, and we do say, Tam v'neshalem el borei olam, give praise to God, the creator of everything. This phrase right here at the end, this has been part of what we say, right? Yeah, it's kind of moving, because that phrase, more than any other phrase maybe in the prophets, has been used as a text to establish, to kind of give us a sense of what Israel has done in the last 75 years. That phrase, they shall rebuild ruined cities and inhabit them, plant vineyards and drink their wine. I mean, those phrases, this is the Haftarah for Achrei Mot Kedoshim. So we read this. This was actually, this was Sam's Torah portion, John. So this was the Haftarah for that week. This is a very powerful text that we use. We actually have used it. I mean, conservative synagogues, many synagogues have used this text as part of the prayer for Israel, and especially we don't do it every year, but the prayer for Israel from the Machzor that we have done in the past. I think this year we'll probably do it. Definitely is appropriate. It feels that we'll probably say several prayers for Israel come October this year. I will share it with you real quick so you could see it. But it is, let me just show it. I'm gonna bring it up. I mean, some of you know it. I mean, some of you may have even read this as an aliyah. Occasionally, we haven't been giving out as many aliyot as we've kind of made the service a little bit shorter, but we definitely have in the past done this prayer, and I'm just going to post it up in a second. But yeah, as I said, it probably is. It's probably one of many prayers that we'll probably add for Israel this year. So hold on one second. Let me just get to the prayer for Israel and pop it up for everybody. So we oftentimes do this after the Torah reading. So when we get to the prayers for Israel, there's a prayer for the United States. By the way, if we do the prayer for the United States, we always do the prayer for Israel. It's not like if we do one, we do the other, but here it is. Let me just show you this real quick. Here. So here's the poem. And again, this is from Machzor Hadash. They shall build away cities and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and drink their wine. Of course, we also have the lines from Zechariah, violence shall no more be heard in your land. There shall be no desolation within your borders.
And we have the praying of justice and righteousness too.
Yep, and there it is right there, justice and righteousness. So, but these some of them, and it says, fulfill the prophetic promises which still await realization. Those are the ones that we still haven't had happen. But this one right here, this one from Amos, the one we just read, that one's been done. That one's been done on a major way, right? Building the cities, right? Rebuilding the cities, inhabiting them, living in them, not just, rebuilding them, but turning them into cities again. And then planting vineyards and drinking wine. That was making the gardens and their fruits come back to life. That's one of the reasons why one of the first things that Israel did, even before it was a country, when Jews first started coming back in these kibbutzim during the first Aliyot waves, they established vineyards. Carmel Winery goes back before, 40 years before Israel was established. There was Carmel wine. Wineries, some of them are not the best wineries anymore in Israel because they've definitely encouraged the creation of great wine, fine table wine. But one of the first things Israel did was, again, before there was even in Israel, when the Yeshuv was happening, when the return was happening, when we were literally at the time, again, this is the historical facts, buying the land from the Turks, right? The Turks sold us the land that they had been administering or controlling. It was part of the Ottoman Empire. We bought this land and turned them into, most of the territory that we bought, we turned into farms. We turned into kibbutzim, or we turned into collective, farms essentially. And that was one of the first things we did was make vineyards and make gardens. And Israel's economy has definitely changed since then. It's no longer, a agricultural country, but there's still an important part of the economy that's agricultural. And now they don't just make wine, they make scotch, they make lots of alcohol. Well, not a lot, but they have a burgeoning distillery business there, which you can decide for yourself whether you like it or not, but that's not the point. The point is that this restoration is called the Yeshuv, it's called the return, and it's called the restoration. And that's what the words were called. It was called the Yeshuv because Shavti at Shavuot, the ruined cities, the restoration was what the Yeshuv was. The return to Israel wasn't just Jews being able to find a home, but restoring and rebuilding their country. So, of course, it's ironic that this is called colonialism. It's actually the most amazing situation of indigenous people coming back to their land and reestablishing themselves in their land. So it's the exact opposite. But of course, we live in a time of a completely Orwellian time of doublespeak. And again, if people are able to establish or in their minds convince themselves that this was not the land that we lived in, regardless of whether God promised it to us. But if this land was indeed our land, which the archaeological excavations, I mean, all the historical evidence is that this was our land. And the fact that there were Jewish people who were living there secretly, even when they weren't allowed to live there and have never left. I mean, what more proof do you have to have? And so, again, we could say, in our country, do Native American people have a right to live where their people, originally came from? Well, ironically, I'm coming to you right now from the Salt River Reservation in Arizona. And I would say that most of us in America believe that the indigenous population here deserves to be able to be on their land, and they're definitely getting restoration. They're definitely getting money for the injustices done to them over their time. The Jewish people kind of want to live in their land, and we hope that there'll be a time when they'll be able to do that in peace and in good relations with their neighbors and with whatever Arab entity is going to be there with them, whether they live in Israel or live outside of Israel or wherever they live. It'll be a time when people will actually be able to not just inhabit those lands, rebuild them, but never have to ever leave again. So Amos is not overall a very happy or positive, or the majority of his text is pretty down. But his last words, his last 8 verses, if you will, are some of the most powerful, uplifting verses, and thankfully, some of the verses that have come back in our lifetime to be a reality in a way that is almost unbelievable. And for a guy who, from his own testimony, was a farmer and guy who worked the land, what could be more powerful than a man who understands the land to say, whatever happens, however we get back, when we get back, we're gonna turn this land into a beautiful land again. And again, the proof of it is what Israel has done and what everyone can see when they go to Israel. The care, concern, and the love that Israel has given to the land over the last 100 or so years. So Israel, as we know, is a pretty high-tech country. It's a country that exists to some extent, and its success, especially in the last 30 years, is really owed to the digital age that we live in. And a lot of its economy is connected to that. But there are no people in the world. I mean, I wish we as Americans had the same kind of love for our country and our resources and the land itself as Israel has for its land and has for, again, taking in the beauty of its country, which we try to do. And whenever we have a tour guide that takes us around Israel, especially our last tour guide, spent a lot of time too telling us about the land, the topography, the geology. You'll find people who, again, all across Israel, some of them who aren't the least bit connected to the land, who have no farm, who have no weren't raised in a kibbutz, weren't raised on the land, but they love hiking, they love walking the land, they love the land of Israel. And we do too, which is why we continue to plant trees and celebrate Tu B'Shvat and make sure that we understand that the land gives forth life. And to some extent, again, look at that last line, I will plant them upon their soil. So the people will be planted in the soil. So yeah, that's the hope, that this time will be the time that we don't ever get uprooted again. So I think we know 2,000 years of not being planted on the soil, what the price was for not having that connection. So when people talk about Zionism being separated from our Jewish identity, you can't. It's not possible, because 2,000 years of history have told us we can't be separated from a country. We have to have a country. We have to have a country because wherever we live, we need to know that there's a place that's ours. Because every other normal group of people has that, and we have to be normal in that way. We have to be consistent, and for all the problems that gives us, it has to be, have to have it. So with that, it's it's time we'll wrap up here. We'll come back next week and read our next prophet. We'll be moving into the last part of the again, we call the minor prophets, but they're not obviously minor, they're just very short. But as you can see right now, we've gone through the first of the three and kind of going again chronologically, Hosea, Joel, and Amos. Next week, we're going to read Obadiah, and we're going to read that in about probably 20 minutes. And then we're going to be going into the prophet Jonah. We may not actually finish Jonah next week. I'm not even 100% sure. Even if we had just Jonah, we would have read that. But we are in person next week. And so hopefully we'll have a lot of you with us in person. And then the last section, or the last parts of the prophets, some of them are quite short, like Obadiah, but also if you look at Nahum, the prophet Nahum, that's only 3 chapters. So some of these we're gonna be reading more than one prophet in a week. Habakkuk, which is one of the hardest prophets to remember. If people go through prophets with me, these last 5 or so of them are the toughest ones. Malachi, I don't forget because he's the last of the prophets. But some of these guys like Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, these are tough. If people can go through these ones, and you can see Zechariah is a pretty long, that one actually will be more than a week that we'll be reading Zechariah. But most of these prophets are, again, fairly short. So that is what we have coming up. And again, we'll see you in person, and please join us in person for Friday night with Joe tomorrow night at that class. And then don't forget, next Monday we'll be at Red Robin. So you can join us and be together. Whenever people come out, those have been great. And we want to thank John Sloman for helping to organize those. We had a great last couple of Eat for TBAs, and the next one is the 11th at Red Robin. And by the way, we still have some people that have been signing up for Mahjong. So we have a real busy few days at Temple Beth Ami, and a lot of good things happening. So hopefully we'll see you, and have a great rest of the week, everybody. Thank you, Rosemary, for reading and getting us through the Prophet Amos, helping us understand. Thanks, everybody. And go read the article that we shared, the end of the golden age of Judaism. Maybe we'll discuss that or talk about it too, if people have some thoughts on it coming up. So thanks, everybody. And
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Good
Take care.
week.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Bye-bye.